Things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, the immigration divide persists and the cracks are beginning to show in His Majesty's government. The Home Secretary has had all but one of her measures to curb record-breaking immigration levels rejected by the Cabinet. As I said last night, to ignore the Home Secretary is to ignore the British people. Some more shocking news for you. A new report has alleged the British taxpayer is having his and her money spent to fund forced abortions in communist China. The author of the report will be joining me in the studio. Oh, and a riddle for you. It was introduced as a temporary measure during the Napoleonic Wars and has regrettably persisted almost ever since, even though Gladstone wants to get rid of it. What could I be referring to? All will be revealed. Plus, to round things off, last night we reported on a Northern David taking on the Goliathan supermarkets, who cut the price of diesel by more than £1 per gallon compared to Tesco. Well, one of the petrol station's employees will be joining our programme this evening. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by my distinguished panel, Toby Young of the Free Speech Union and former Labour councillor Kevin Craig. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But now it's time for your hourly rejuvenation of news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thanks very much indeed, and good evening to you. The top story on GB News tonight. The Prime Minister's office has just said the EU and the UK have agreed to strengthen their cooperation on migration and the threat posed by Russia. Rishi Sunak and the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte have agreed to work together to build an international coalition to provide Ukraine with combat air capabilities, supporting everything from training to procuring F-16 jets. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky joined the Council via video link and stressed the urgency for stronger air defences against Russian aggression.
There is still much to be done. Ukraine's territory is big, and to make air defense results like last night's the rule throughout the country, we need additional air defense systems and missiles. We also need modern fighter jets, without which no air defense system will be perfect. And I'm sure we will get there.
Well, the Prime Minister's already been addressing the Council of Europe on the subject of migration, saying the world's most vulnerable people are paying the price for unlawful migration. He's been telling world leaders the international system for policing human trafficking just isn't working. That's as the government tries to implement its own illegal migration bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords. The new law aims to tackle small boat crossings, sending asylum seekers back home or to a third country, such as Rwanda.
Illegal migration exploits the most vulnerable. It risks crowding out those with a genuine case for asylum. And it strains the trust that our citizens have, not just in our domestic borders, but in the international system. And that's why so many of us are already acting at the national level, and why we need to do more to cooperate across borders and across jurisdictions to end illegal migration and stop the boats.
Well, in news here at home, 2 poultry workers in England have tested positive for bird flu, although there are no signs of human-to-human transmission. Both cases are believed to be linked to the same farm. The UK Health Security Agency is running a programme of testing now to make sure those workers who've come into contact with infected birds are screened. But it's also running asymptomatic testing. Test results show one of the workers infected is likely to have been contaminated after inhaling materials on the farm. It's unclear if the second person was contaminated after inhalation or not. 3 men who supplied fake passports to criminals have been jailed today. Anthony Beard, Christopher Zitek and Alan Thompson helped murderers and drug dealers evade justice. Beard, who paid vulnerable people for their expired documents, was sentenced to 6 years and 8 months in prison. His accomplices will serve a combined term of 11 years. Essex Police is investigating an allegation of serious sexual assault against the Solihull MP, Julian Knight. It follows a referral by Scotland Yard and comes after the Metropolitan Police dropped its investigation into a claim more than a month ago. Mr Knight, who was stripped of the Conservative whip, has denied what he described as a false and malicious accusation. He doesn't plan to run at the next election. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in an hour. Now back to Jacob.
The Prime Minister in Iceland was talking about illegal migration. But actually, the news story of the day is legal migration, because it was reported today that the Home Secretary had had all but one of her proposals to curb record-breaking legal immigration rejected by the Cabinet. And this is fundamentally important because those of us with any length of political memory will know that David Cameron promised to get the numbers down to the tens of thousands from the 100,000s, whereas we're now hearing that the numbers could be up to 1 million. So instead of coming down, particularly after Brexit, when we had full control of our borders, it's been going up, and up almost threefold from where it was when we were still a member of the European Union. So this is really serious. It's not what the Conservatives have promised, and it's not what has been expected by Parliament or the voters. And it seems to come from the Treasury, which thinks, in cahoots with the OBR, that if we have a low-skill, low-wage economy with lots of people coming in, we will have some element of GDP growth, even if we don't have GDP per capita growth. That currently, under the system we've got, nearly 300,000 people will be able to come in with a minimum wage rate of £10.75 an hour, not much more than the national living wage. This is not creating the high-skilled economy that we need. It is low-skilled, low-wage mass migration, which it's very hard for people in this country to compete with, because we can't actually compete with low-skilled wages. Those economies have a completely different structure. We need to be focusing on the industries and the activities that have higher wage levels. So if in this country fruit picking is uneconomic, we must think of other things to do with our land and allow the fruit pickers to stay in their own countries to pick fruit that is grown there. We need to have the comparative advantage of what we do well, so we have a high-wage, high-prosperity economy. That's what the free market tells you. That is what free trade is all about. Not least because there's a public mandate for curbing immigration. It's what people have voted for. And why do they vote for it? Not because they're hard-nosed, not because they don't have sympathy for migrants who are admirable, looking for a better life, but because we don't have the houses, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the schools, we don't have the GP practices for the people who are here at the moment, let alone another million more. So people have voted to see the numbers reduced, and yet we are facing net immigration figures possibly near to 1 million. And it seems very unfortunate that the Cabinet, in its individual silos, saying this is good for my department, is ignoring the Home Secretary, who's looking at what is good for the whole of the British people. So the Home Secretary deserves the Prime Minister's support. But of course, I want to know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. I'm now joined, delighted to be joined, by Stephen Taylor, the owner of Winterwood Farm. Stephen, thank you for joining me. I understand you have fruit farms not just in the UK, but also abroad. Doesn't it make more sense to import the fruit rather than to import the labour?
In reality, that's what's happening, of course, with the reduction in labour availability in the UK since Brexit. So, for example, we do have farms in Poland, as you say, and also in South Africa. So, yes, if you give an example of blueberries, we can produce blueberries and deliver them to the UK for the same price as we can, just the cost of picking in the UK is now. So I think the point, I understand the point you make, is it better to do it there? But I think the UK government needs to decide whether or not we want to produce our own food, and there's the whole food security aspect, or do we, as you suggest, want to divest that business?
But isn't the food security issue a different issue? That is to say, it's about producing very large quantities of food involving industrialisation and mechanisation. It's using combine harvesters and the mass means of production of food rather than the specialist foods, which are much easier to import, but also not so essential to the diet of the nation.
I would differ with you on that. Fruit and veg surely is a key part of all our diets. We're all told to eat more. And in fact, the industry, the horticultural industry, has been a massive success story over the last 20 years.
But isn't it possible to harvest some vegetables in a mechanised way, and that shouldn't we be investing in more mechanisation? I understand some soft fruits are very difficult to pick in a mechanised way.
Yeah, our business is soft fruit, to be clear, not veg.
And you were mentioning vegetables. Vegetables, it is easier to pick mechanised, and we need to be developing the machines that can pick soft fruits. I understand the French, though they don't always approve of it, do have machines for picking the grapes for some of their wine, and that this is a high-skilled economy that we need to move towards, rather than thinking that the answer is cheap labour from abroad.
Well, like I said, we have a choice to make, don't we? We have the choice to continue growing soft fruit in the country or to grow it abroad. What is actually happening is exactly as you said should happen in a way. As labour gets short, the price of the labour goes up and it becomes unviable here. So this year, for example, there's going to be less English raspberries on the shelf purely because growers are unsure if they're going to have enough pickers. So it is going naturally in that direction anyway.
And isn't that actually beneficial, because we want our fellow citizens to have higher wages, and that therefore we need them to be doing the higher skilled jobs, and that the answer isn't the influx of low-skilled labour, it is to find jobs that provide higher pay for the domestic workforce?
If there was high unemployment in this country, that argument has a bit more merit, I would suggest. Unemployment is very low in this country. In our particular area, ourselves and the local growers, we employ more people than there are unemployed in our region. So part of the issue with upskilling British labour is it's not that Brits are lazy or actually don't want to do the job. It's because they're living in the wrong location.
But we've got an awful lot of people who are economically inactive, who could be economically inactive, who, if the wages were high enough, would be likely to. We've actually seen 100,000 people come back into the labour market for higher-paid jobs recently.
You're exactly right. If you double the wages, I'm sure there'll be more Brits that do it. But going back to your point, then the consumer, especially what we're seeing now with the cost of living crisis, they're not going to pay double for the fruit. So therefore, what happens is you end up not growing it in the first place, and you have the result is exactly what you said. We import more. So this year we're going to be importing more raspberries, for example, for the exact reason that you just said.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. I think this is a really interesting argument, which I'm going to continue now with my panel, Toby Young of the Free Speech Union and former Labour councillor Kevin Craig. Kevin, let me come to you first, because it seems to me this is, in fact, the free market operating, and we need to look at what we have a comparative advantage at and focus on that so that people in this country have higher wages. We need to be a high-wage economy.
I think most people agree that we need to be a high-wage economy, Jacob, but before Brexit, the fruit and veg in our fields got picked.
But we didn't have 1 million people coming in. We had some people coming in from foreign countries to pick fruit and vegetables over many, many decades, even before we were members of the European Union. But it's the overall immigration picture that has got out of control, of which fruit and veg is a small part. That if it were only fruit and veg, that would be fine. But it's so many other areas of life where people are coming in now to take the low-paid, low-skilled jobs. That's the issue.
Yeah, but since Brexit, the number of meals that were wasted in terms of food unpicked is into the 7 billion meals wasted in 2022. The NFU say that 40% of their members lost crops in the field. And even your own government has issued this year, I think, up to 45,000 additional seasonal visas to allow us to get the crops out of the soil. And I think what's quite remarkable about how you've positioned this evening is that you seem to be saying, let the free market do its thing, and it doesn't matter ultimately if we don't produce as much of our own food.
No, we've got to produce food that we can produce economically, and that means higher skills, mechanisation. It means not being a low-skilled fruit-picking society. Toby?
Well, you're focusing on the fruit pickers, and as you've just said, Rishi Sunak, I think today announced that the increase in the number of visas given to seasonal workers is going to increase from 30,000 to 45,000. That's going to be extended to next year. But it isn't just seasonal workers.
It's nearly 300,000 for social care.
300,000 for social care, up to nearly 500,000 students. In the year to December, 485,000 student visas were issued. One of the things that Suella proposed in Cabinet to reduce overall net migration was to reduce the number of student visas. That was opposed by Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary. She's also suggested that once they finish their courses, they shouldn't be able to stay on. And if they drop out, they shouldn't be able to stay on. And in particular, they shouldn't be able to bring dependents over with them. And there was an extraordinary number of dependents. In the year to December, something like 135,000 dependents came in on the back of those close to 500,000 student visas issued in just 1 year. I mean, it beggars belief that the Cabinet aren't willing to at least give Suella's proposals the time of day and consider them properly, instead of just shooting them down. It's as though they want to lose the next general election.
And this must be right, because it is out of control, and voters keep on voting to have it under control.
Well, what voters voted for? I mean, I think one of the main, and we all know, as a Labour Party person and a businessman primarily, as well as a former councillor, I understand that one of the reasons Brexit happened is that there was some people afraid to talk about controlling our borders. I think it's perfectly fine to talk about controlled immigration, but you said it at the top. You talked about GP surgeries and schools. Why can't we just build the houses this country needs? And also, the Home Secretary, she seemed to be suggesting that we put the elderly to work in the fields, or I don't know if this is job creation for Tory councillors that lost their seats.
But I just think this is the completely wrong approach, that we should not be a low-skilled economy, and that low-skilled jobs need to be replaced, and that bringing in migrants to fill the low-skilled jobs is not the answer. It's a very short-term answer. That farmers should be designing their farms and planting things that they can pick with machines.
And over time, I think the NFU, the Farmers Union, would say that that's where they want to get to. But the shock of Brexit, if you like...
But it's not the shock of Brexit, because we've still got all these hundreds of thousands of people coming in. Brexit's a complete red herring on this. We better bring Toby back in, because he's hardly said a word.
Well, yeah, the levels of net migration have actually increased since Brexit. So it's hard to blame, crops rotting in the fields on Brexit.
They say that a lot of folks, and apologies for interrupting just on this specific point, they say that a lot of workers from the EU went home after Brexit.
Yeah, but they've been replaced
we've got other people coming in, that's
plenty
right.
of other people
That's
coming
right.
in, which is why we have higher levels of net migration now than we did in 2016.
And the food that isn't being picked is in the tens of millions of pounds out of an industry that runs into the many billions of pounds. It's a tiny fraction, and you always have some element of food that doesn't get picked from the
One of the proposals that Suella Braverman suggested in Cabinet today was setting a minimum amount that employers can pay skilled workers. I mean, the reason they like to import labour is because they can pay less for it, even for skilled labour. So, I mean, that seemed to me a very sensible proposal. And yes, it might lead to some uptick in prices, the point that you guys made earlier. But
you're absolutely right. You allow people in on low wages, that keeps wages down. It means there are fewer Brits who want to do it. It means you need more people to come in from abroad, and it becomes a vicious circle. Thank you very much to my excellent panel. We're going to be hearing from them again shortly. Remember, I always want to hear your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Up next, how your taxes have been funding deeply disturbing practices in communist China. And don't forget, David of the north of Shropshire actually, is here for a triumphant victory lap after undercutting Goliath's exorbitant petrol prices. You won't want to miss it.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
You're listening.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Neil. I'm not going to tell you what Neil says, but he's right, so well done, Neil. Peter. How can we begin to solve the housing shortage with immigration at the current level? Absolutely. Susan. If students pick fruit, give them 1 year's free university. Margaret. I agree with the Home Secretary. They need to support her. They will lose votes for sure on this issue. And Mike. The Prime Minister must give his backing to the Home Secretary. Failing to do so will render the Conservative Party obsolete. Well, I hope not. Now, there's been a very serious report from the campaign group, the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, which reveals that UK taxpayer funds have been used to fund coerced abortions in China. The bombshell report has detailed that over a 2-year period, approximately £82 million of your money has been sent to communist China in aid of women and girls to access abortions. However, alarms were raised after the Chinese Communist Party put in place a system that reduced the Uyghur birth rate, including mandatory sterilizations and forced abortions. The report has found that since then at least 186,400 fewer children were born in Xinjiang. Now, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has insisted that no UK aid is used to fund forced abortion practices in China. Well, joining me now is the author of the report, Alethea Williams, Public Policy Manager at the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. Alethea, this is really important, that we know that China forces abortions. Actually, I discovered at your meeting earlier today that you're now allowed 3 children, so it's the 4th child who would be aborted. And as I am, in fact, a 4th child, I noted that quite strongly, that people just are not allowed to live because of China's policy. And you have evidence that the Foreign Office is funding this.
Well, so there's certainly evidence that we're still giving aid to China. So this shouldn't be the case. In 2011, the then Department for International Development said they were going to cut all development aid to China. But what we found is that money is still going from other departments. And also for the Foreign Office itself, there's I'd say a lack of transparency in where money is being spent. So they said there was a 95% cut, but the Independent Commission for Aid Impact, where we got a lot of these figures from, said that this figure is, and I quote, misleading at best. And it said that this only applies to a certain stream of funding, which was aid spent in China. But then there was other aid that was counted as aid with China. So
not all aid that's spent in China is spent by the Foreign Office. It can go via other departments and into organisations, including UN organisations, that may then provide funds to forced abortion providers in China.
Yes, so kind of another stream is the money that we give to these international family planning organisations, so-called. So the International Planned Parenthood Federation and the United Nations Population Association. They both are active in China. So, for instance, IPPF, the China Family Planning Association, which carries out all these policies, has been an IPPF member since 1983.
And receives money from the IPPF?
Yes, it does, yeah.
So the money is going from the UK government to an international organisation, to the Chinese organisation that carries out forced abortion. So there is a clear link from British taxpayers through to forced abortions.
Exactly, yes.
And that must be very worrying for people, regardless of their view of abortion. I mean, many of the viewers may know my view on abortion, but that even if you are in favour of a woman's choice, this is denying women choice because they are having children taken out of their wombs. They are not allowed to carry a birth to full term.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of terrifying because it hits at one of the most personal, kind of private things, the right to have children. I mean, people might say now, well, China's relaxed its policies. You're allowed 3 children. Well, you'll know you have more than 3 children yourself. The idea of the state telling you how many children you can have is just abhorrent. And just because they relaxed it to 3 doesn't mean the state-enforced coercive policy is not in place. And then it's particularly egregious what's happening to the minority populations in Xinjiang. And there's very recent evidence of forced abortions there.
And this figure of the decline in number of births of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, that is the whole of the Planned Parenthood effort by the Chinese state. So they won't all be abortions, but they will be simply stopping the Uyghurs having children, full stop.
Yeah, so it's not just abortions, so there is a lot of that. There's forced sterilisations, forced implantations of intrauterine devices. And, the Associated Press just talked about a climate of terror around having children. So, women and families just having to hide their children. There's one story we report here of a man with 4 children, and he was hiding them under carts, when they were going into town, ended up running away for a time because the authorities were after them. It's just that kind of atmosphere there.
And they tell women that once they've had one child, they've got to wait 4 years for the next, that it's an ordered parenthood. You're not allowed freely to have your 3 children. You have to do it according to the rules of the state, and they will ask your neighbours to spy on you and use coercive measures to take control of women's fertility.
Yeah, exactly. It's just something we can't even really imagine here. The idea of the state having oversight of, when women are having periods, when they're planning to have their children. And even if the state is maybe not cracking down quite as much as they were in some areas because they're now worried about the huge demographic crisis they're facing brought by their own policies, we're seeing that employers are now doing this. Women are being subjected to pregnancy checks and being asked about their child-rearing plans in job interviews. And
you've launched the report recently. Why has the Foreign Office not been extremely concerned about this? It just seems to have said, no, we're not doing this, move along, please. Is there a feeling that abortion is just generally a good thing, and therefore to challenge the Chinese on forced abortions would be overstepping the mark?
I do think there is an element of that. I think the narrative in this country can be so much that abortion is an empowering thing. It's a women's right. It's what people need. And, regardless of whether people agree on that, I think we should all be able to agree that being forced into an abortion is a terrible thing. But I think if you've got in your mind abortion is an empowering thing, it's just a bit uncomfortable to think that it's actually being used as a tool of human rights abuse, as it is in China.
And that's the fundamental point, that this is a human rights abuse in China that is very well documented, but unfortunately is being funded by British taxpayers.
Yeah, exactly. So nothing we're saying here is really new. I've pulled stuff from the Independent Commission for Aid Impact, just from stuff that's already been out there. It's not new. We're just kind of pulling these sources together from the Uyghur Tribunal as well. So it's just really about bringing these issues together and bringing it to light.
Well, thank you very much, Aletha. We asked the Chinese embassy for comment, but not surprisingly, we haven't heard back. Coming up after the intermission, I will reveal the temporary measure that Gladstone promised to abolish that is a particularly stealthy, creepy, crawly type of tax, which is increasingly hitting middle earners. And don't forget, the great British people have struck back against the big business rob dog petrol stations. One of those heroes is joining State of the Nation shortly.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. June says, Jacob, thank you for being honest. Wish there were more like you. I've lost faith with the majority of Conservative MPs. Well, I hope I can inspire you with more faith. Stephen, thank you so much. What a wonderful man you are, standing up for the right of the unborn child. God bless you. And Stuart, spot on. China has nothing to do with us. Why is millions of our tax money getting sent there? Now, I know my brilliant viewers and listeners, including Neil, have already figured out the riddle. But for any of you who've just escaped the BBC gulag, the answer to the riddle, it was introduced as a temporary measure during the Napoleonic Wars and has regrettably persisted almost ever since. It was repealed, then brought back, and then Gladstone kept on saying he wanted to get rid of it and didn't ultimately manage. It is the least favourite of the two inevitabilities of life, from my point of view. It is tax, but particularly income tax. And according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the government's policy to freeze tax thresholds for the next 6 years is set to see 1 in 5 people enter the 40% tax bracket. That is what is known as fiscal drag. That's because wages will increase over time with inflation, but the tax brackets remain the same, so people move into the next bracket, whilst their money could be less in real terms. Let me explain this. If you earn £50,000 now, you will pay the 20p rate. If there's 10% inflation, that should go to 55,000 to remain even. You wouldn't be any better or worse off. But if on that last 5,000 your tax rate goes up from 20% to 40%, you only get £3,000 instead of £4,000, therefore you are £1,000 worse off in real terms. It's a stealth tax. It may present itself as a freeze, but it's an increase. And this bracket was intended for wealthier people, but now it will hit teachers and nurses who have become dragged into this, hence fiscal drag. But in a time of a cost of living crisis, surely what the British public need, and what was promised in the Tory Party manifesto, is that those on lower incomes or middle incomes need more of their own money. Money is better spent when it's in the hands of those who earned it, not by the government. But still with me is my esteemed panel, Toby Young of the Free Speech Union and the former Labour councillor, Kevin Craig. Now, Kevin, a former Labour chancellor said he wanted to squeeze the rich until the pip squeaked. He didn't really want to squeeze middle earners, though, did he?
Glad to see that we're keeping up to date by quoting Dennis Healey from the 19th.
Well, I'm glad you know who I'm talking about.
I do like a bit of current affairs. Listen, if I can say so, your party, your government, has overseen some really quite challenging facts linked to income and tax, which are as shocking and as worrying as the fiscal drag you've identified. Now, you know, we today have a country where there is a tax loophole for non-doms, right? People who register to live here and pay their taxes abroad, £1 billion, and Labour want to sort that out and put the money into the NHS and schools.
Labour spent that about 15 times.
No,
this is like the Lib Dems 1p on income tax.
That's down the pub banter from you when you're faced with economic reality. The other thing is your recent pension reforms in government. The reason people lose faith with Conservative MPs is you prioritise when you reform pensions. Those of us, everybody here today actually is in the top tax paying band. Pension reforms prioritise the wealthiest, and at the same time, your government, which you're a lovely chap, but you never want to be part of Rishi's team. You're part of the Conservative team. This is your record. You're in it. You're bonded together. You are the guys and ladies.
I'm not sure Rishi would think we were bonded quite that closely, but I'd better bring Toby in.
It's a mess.
Because it seems to me that in real terms, the governments can maintain thresholds without losing money relative to GDP. So it is a genuine tax pinch rather than something that is essential to balance the books.
Yes, I mean, it feels like a stealth tax raid because they think they need to raise billions more pounds every year. And according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, this will mean the fact that the thresholds at which you start paying the higher rate have been frozen now until 2028 will mean that the government brings in an additional £26 billion per year. So it's actually a bigger tax rise, effectively, than increasing corporation tax to 25%. It's the biggest tax rise since Geoffrey Howe increased VAT to 15%. It's extraordinary that a Conservative government is engaging in a policy I would more often associate with your party. As for raising money from the magic money tree of non-doms, hang on a second. If you abolish non-dom status, all the people currently paying, suppose it £30,000 a year in order to enjoy non-dom status will just disappear to Monaco and other more tax-friendly regimes. You're not going to raise any more money from those people.
I think it's a fair point. I think it's open to debate, Toby, because I think this country, with rule of law, relatively low corruption, is a place that will remain highly desirable to the wealthy. And the fact is, over time, people don't mind paying taxes if they look around and they think the country is in good order, things are running well, and I think that's part of it. You know, there's an argument that our taxes need to be adjusted so that those with the so-called broadest shoulders pay more.
Yes, but are the middle earners in this category those with the broadest shoulders? Because
I'm not sure
their mortgage has gone up. All the goods they buy have gone up. They're really hit.
Friend Liz Truss.
Nothing to do with
mortgage
it. Absolutely nothing to do with that.
Rocketed up there, right through the roof.
Interest rates have gone up by more in the United States, and you cannot say the United States economy was determined by Liz Truss. Powerful though she was as Prime Minister.
Did you think she did a good job with that?
Completely separate.
It's a mortgage tax on us, you know, Liz Truss, what she did.
It's completely irrelevant to where interest rates are now. It had no effect. Had no effect on what the Bank of England has done with interest rates.
The market turmoil coincided with the announcement of the mini-budget. The mini-budget didn't cause the market turmoil. I think the Bank of England had a bigger role in that than...
And our interest rates have gone up by less than the United States.
That's true. But to your point, Jacob, it isn't those with the broader shoulders that are going to be shouldering this particular burden. One of the facts that the Institute for Fiscal Studies came up with is that police officers, something like 25% of police officers in 1993 were paying the top rate, paying the 40% rate. By 2027, it'll be something like 37%. I mean, extraordinary. Teachers, too. Even some nurses are going to be pulled into the higher tax bracket. So it really,
that's very fair.
Crazy.
That is the worry.
And what we need to be doing is less. That if the government goes on spending 47% of GDP, taxes will inevitably be high, whoever is in government. If we get taxation down and reduce the burden on middle-income earners, then we need to be doing less. That's the key.
Do you think? Do you think your party has managed our finances in a very responsible way in the last 13 years?
Well, we did a lot better than Gordon Brown did in his last few years when... What was the note left by your friend, the Chief Secretary of Treasury? There's no money left.
No, Liam Burns. Forget Liam Burns' note.
It was quite important, because it was many a true word spoken in a jest.
Hang on, Jacob. Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling stopped this country from financial meltdown, right? We disagree on that, OK? But there are many people around the world...
Actually, I think Alistair Darling was a remarkably good Chancellor Chancellor. I think he took some really important decisions, but he was making decisions to rectify errors made by Gordon Brown as Chancellor that left us with £1 in every 4 that was being borrowed.
Well, look, I'd like to hear you defend more the last 13 years and how you spent money during COVID, because tonight we've all had this discussion about tax. And Toby, I do agree with you. It is not good for the country that these professions, police officers, are going up into that tax bracket. Nobody wants that.
Toby, final word.
The problem we have, Jacob, is that we have a ballooning welfare bill, partly because so many people are unwilling to go back to work. So 50% of the working age population in Blackpool, unemployed, refusing to work.
Do you think they're lazy?
Is
that what it is?
Lazy. I think they're not incentivized.
Fortunately, before we get into that
too low.
very tendentious matter, thank you to my panel. Coming up, the moment you've all been waiting for. David is waiting in the wings. He's got his catapult ready with the stone in it, or he's going to show us the catapult he used having slain Goliath. Goliath, in this instance, being Tesco and other exorbitant petrol stations. That's coming your way after these messages from our sponsors.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel. Yesterday, we triumphantly reported on two of the greatest Britons that there are on offer, one of whom, Mr. Dave Roberts, a local petrol station owner in Shropshire, took a very English stand against the exorbitant and mighty supermarket giants, undercutting their diesel prices by roughly £1 per gallon. It then subsequently emerged that the competition watchdog, which clearly had been listening, the CMA, is going to investigate petrol retailers for unnecessarily high prices for petrol and diesel. Now, this is the free market doing what it does best. The big robber barons artificially inflate prices, but then local heroes like Dave, and it is so appropriate that he's called David, step in, seize the opportunity and provide reasonably priced fuel for the great people of places like Shropshire. And before you know it, queues build up and the robber barons at places such as Tesco's are forced to follow suit. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to say that Dave Roberts, the owner of the petrol station, and one of his members of staff, Finance Director, Mr. Ricky Allman, joins me now all the way from Shropshire. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Dave, what made you do this? Hasn't it actually cost you money by cutting prices?
No, well, we haven't just done this. We've been like this for probably 2 years or whatever, at least 12 months. But, you know, it's what we do. And we gave the local people the benefit of it as well, you know, although it does create a bit of a queue on the road when they're coming in, you know. We have asked the council to come and have a look at the situation, our local council, but that was like 10 months ago and they've not been here, so it just carries on. But now they got used to the idea. Them that were coming during the day, they're coming later on in the day when the queue's not so much, and they've worked around the big queues, you know.
But that's absolutely brilliant. So you're actually making up your margin by simply selling more volume. So I was worried, Ricky, that you might be put out as finance director that profits were going down, but by selling greater volume, you keep the profits up.
Yeah, exactly. We've always had the policy that we'd rather sell high volumes and make a small margin, and that's what we do. And if anything, we make more money for the more customers that are coming through the door. The customers are happy because they're getting cheap fuel compared to a lot of other places that are artificially keeping their prices high.
And Dave, people tended to think that the independents were more expensive than the supermarkets, that they had the buying power and so on and so forth. You've managed to prove that this isn't true and that actually going to independents gets you better value for money.
Yeah, well, you know, we do make things a little bit better for ourselves. We transport the fuel ourselves. We fetch it from Stanlow. Whenever we want it, we fetch it. And we did a deal with SR, but it's nothing like the difference of what the people are charging and what we sell it for, you know.
But what's so important is that you've shown that the supermarkets are running a racket, because if one individual can do it, an individual firm can do it, and can bring prices down by £1 a gallon for diesel, then the supermarkets are taking all the rest of us for fools, aren't they?
Absolutely. Well, you know, we can charge what we want for the fuel, as you know, but I've always tried to look after customers, really, and give them good service. We put extra staff on to keep the flow going on the till, and it works well.
And I imagine you have very loyal customers who've been coming to you for years.
Oh, absolutely. We've got a lot of account customers, local people, you know, and they're lapping it up. So
have any of the supermarkets been in touch with you? Are they annoyed with you? Has anybody come around and said, can we buy your petrol station because we want to get rid of the competition, or nothing like that? You haven't had any pressure?
Nothing like that, no. So.
And then you got into the papers. The Sun carried the story about you yesterday. Are you enjoying being the centre of attention? And has this brought you even more customers? Are you coping?
Just about, really. I don't interview with them all, to be honest. I haven't got a lot of spare time, but, you know, I'm busy looking after our customers, sort of thing.
And you've got enough staff to take all the money that you're getting from customers who have now heard about you and are probably driving further and further to come to your petrol station.
Well, they do, yeah.
We're having people travel from 20 miles away because they're saying they're still making a saving with the distance they're travelling, and they'd rather give the money to us who've got an honest policy of pricing, rather than the garages near them that have got their prices so high.
Absolutely. I don't suppose you're thinking of setting up a branch in Somerset that I could benefit from?
We've had a lot of requests for branches of our forecourts all across the UK on our social media pages.
Well, I think this is how the free market works, that if a company can make money by charging a lower price than everybody else, then they can expand because they have the cash flow with which to do it. So it seems to me, Ricky, as the finance director, you must really like this business model.
Oh, it works well because the more customers that we get, the more shop sales that we have of crisps and drinks and things like that. It all helps the overall business.
Well, absolutely. And the Competition and Markets Authority is now getting involved, and that's going to be an investigation. And we've had a Rees-Mogg. I think somebody wants to investigate GE Energy, who own Asda, and they also control 70% of the fuel stations, and that's why fuel prices are so high, and they have a monopoly. So it's absolutely terrific that we have somebody who is breaking up this monopolistic activity on the forecourts. Well, thank you very much to Ricky and Dave. What you're doing is really saving people living near you a fortune, and it shows the free market at its best and its most robust. So thank you for what you're doing for the people of Shropshire. Now, that's all from me, but up next is the mighty Dan Wootton, who generously last night, when I got home and was watching his programme, on the advice of Carol Malone, made me his greatest Briton of the night. So I'm very grateful to you, Dan. What have you got in store for us?
Yeah, you owe me one, Jake. No, seriously,
I do.
You deserve that. You deserve that. Look, another great Tory on the show tonight, Simon Clarke. Obviously, he was in the Truss cabinet. He's very concerned about these new statistics that show 1 in 5 Brits very soon will be in the top tax rate bracket. And you've got to admit, Jacob, as a Thatcherite, that is a very concerning place for your party to be in. So he is hitting back hard on taxes. Plus, Tom Bauer in the studio, the royal expert on Meghan Markle 2.0 and why Prince Harry has decided to start another war with the Home Office about his security. And Jacob, I've been meaning to talk to you about this all week.
Those are really interesting stories. Yes. Tom Bauer is such a good biographer.
Yes.
He gets into the details and gets his facts right.
He is. But Jacob, just one I've got to ask you about. I've been meaning to talk to you about it all week. Are you Team Holly Willoughby or Team Philip Schofield?
I'm Team GBNews. I watch this channel rather than other lesser channels. But that's all from me. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation tonight. And you're going to get the weather, and let's hope the sun is shining in Somerset. Good night.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Greg Dewhurst. Well, sunny spells over the next few days. There is the risk of some rain in the forecast, largely affecting the north and northwest of the UK at times. Looking at the bigger picture, high pressure holds on, keeping most weather systems at bay, but just notice they will scoot across the far north at times. This weather front perhaps sinking a little further south by Friday. Tuesday ends on a quiet note, plenty of clear spells to end the day, perhaps just a few lingering showers initially, but overnight it should be largely dry. And with that high pressure around and light winds, we could just see a few mist and fog patches. And under the clear skies, turning quite chilly, temperatures mid-single figures, perhaps an isolated touch of grass frost to start Wednesday morning. But that means sunny spells, though it is cloudier